Welcome back. Today I was going through a particular script that kept returning to the same image. A woman standing at a marina in the gray early morning, pen already uncapped before the notary even sat down. What makes this story different is that the revenge is not loud. It is a signed document. You are watching Historical Manhwa. The smell hit her first. Salt and rust and the particular rot of bilge water that no amount of marine-grade cleaner ever fully erases. Elena Marsh had stood at this exact dock 8 years ago in her first life and smelled nothing. She had been too busy watching Daniel's profile against the sunset, too busy cataloging the particular way his jaw softened when he laughed, too distracted by the naive conviction that a man who bought you a boat must love you in some architectural, permanent way. Oh, she was not distracted now. The dock beneath her feet was the same splintered teak composite that the marina had never bothered to replace, the same boards that had a slight give near slip 44 where the water table sat too high during spring tides. The compass rose sat in that slip, 44, 62 feet of white fiberglass that had cost Daniel's family trust $400,000 in 2009 and had been steadily, invisibly bleeding value ever since. Elena knew the exact number. She had spent 3 years of her second life reconstructing every financial document that had passed through Daniel Marsh's hands, first in memory, then in fact, pulling marina records and insurance filings, and the quiet paper trail that a man leaves when he is certain no one intelligent is paying attention. Daniel had always been certain of that. It was, in the end, the most expensive certainty of his life. She was 31 years old again. In her first life, she had been 31 when she stood in this same marina and heard from a dock worker named Pete, who clearly believed she already knew, that Daniel and Cassidy had been together for 2 years. 2 years. Elena had done the math in the parking lot, sitting in her car with the engine off, and understood that the overlap was total. The entire courtship, the engagement, the wedding, the first year of marriage. All of it had been concurrent with Cassidy Vane occupying the other half of Daniel's life in the apartment on Crescent Street that Elena had assumed was a sublet he kept for late nights at the office. In her first life, she had wept. She had confronted. She had screamed in a restaurant and been photographed, and the photograph had made it into a local gossip column, and she had spent 18 months in a divorce that stripped her of the house, and the savings account she had grown from her own consulting income, and the self-possession she had once considered her most durable quality. Daniel had walked away with everything except the compass rose, which the divorce agreement had awarded to Elena because at the time she had wanted it for sentimental reasons, and because she had not known, could not have known, that the engine had been running hot for 11 months, and that the bilge pump had been jury-rigged with components sourced from a boat show vendor in Fort Lauderdale, who had since declared bankruptcy and whose parts carried no traceable warranty. She had found out when the marine surveyor came for the insurance renewal and handed her a report so damaging it had read like a list of grievances. The engine alone needed $50,000. The hull had osmotic blistering along the waterline. Just the electrical system was a fire waiting for a trigger. The total remediation cost had come in at $112,000, and Elena, post-divorce and cash depleted, had quietly surrendered the slip lease and walked away from the Compass Rose the way one walks away from a hospital bill one cannot pay. She had died 14 months later, which was perhaps the most clarifying event of her life. Not dramatically, a car accident on the coast road, the kind that happens at dusk when the sun drops to exactly the angle that defeats a visor and a driver makes a left turn without seeing clearly. Elena had been that driver. There had been no other car, no drama, just the guardrail, and then the stillness of the water 60 feet below, and then the particular quiet of understanding that a life has concluded. And then, with a violence that felt almost administrative, she had woken up. Not in a hospital, in her own bed. Well, the one in the apartment she had kept before Daniel, before the marriage, before all of it. 23 years old. The alarm not yet ringing. The ceiling above her the same water-stained white she had forgotten she had once stared at for 2 years, while building a consulting practice from a laptop and a voice that people, she had slowly realized, tended to trust. She had not wasted time on disbelief. Disbelief was a luxury of the uninformed. She had lain there for approximately 4 minutes, and then she had gotten up and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table and begun, with the methodical calm of someone doing inventory, to reconstruct everything she knew. That had been 8 years ago. 8 years of second life that Elena had used with a precision that she suspected would have disturbed the therapist she had seen briefly after the divorce in her first life, the one who had encouraged her to let go of anger and focus on what she could control. Elena had taken that advice seriously, in her own way. She had let go of the anger entirely. What remained after the anger was removed was something cooler and more useful. A clear-eyed technical interest in exactly how the machinery of betrayal functioned and exactly which lever, pulled at exactly the right moment, caused it to collapse. She had graduated law school in her first life with middling grades and a vague sense that she would use the degree the way most people use a law degree, as a signaling device rather than a working tool. In her second life, she had graduated top of her quartile, with a specialization she had chosen not for prestige, but for utility, maritime law, and commercial litigation. Oh, the specific combination that the partner at her second-year summer placement had described as extremely niche and extremely lucrative if you know where to look. Elena had known exactly where to look. The salt air moved off the water, and she breathed it in without romance. Behind her, she heard the rental car door open and close. Marcus Webb, who was her associate at the firm she had joined 18 months ago, and who understood about 70% of what this particular morning required of him, walked up beside her with 2 cups of gas station coffee that were genuinely terrible, and that she took without comment because the ritual of receiving the bad coffee mattered to Marcus, and costing him that small satisfaction would have been unkind. "Notaries inside," Marcus said. He was looking at the compass rose with the expression of someone who had been told a painting was valuable and was doing his best to see it. "Good. You want to tell me again why we're doing this at 6 in the morning?" "Because the marina office opens at 8, and the harbor master does his slip walk-through at 7:45, and I want this filed before either of those things happens." Marcus nodded. He had learned over 18 months that when Elena gave a reason like that, it was the surface reason, and there were 2 or 3 structural reasons underneath it that she would explain if he needed them, and that he usually did not need. The actual structural reason was this: Daniel Marsh was flying back from the Cayman Islands at noon, and the time zones meant that his phone, which he checked compulsively at 6 a.m., regardless of where he was, would show the notification from his property alert service approximately 90 minutes after the transfer document was filed, and by the time he landed at 2 p.m. Eastern and got into a car and drove to this marina, the compass rose would belong legally and completely to Cassidy Vane. The second structural reason was that Cassidy did not yet know this was happening. Elena had arranged it through a charitable intermediary structure that she had spent 6 months building with the particular patience of someone who knows the ending and is working backward toward a beginning. The structure was simple in concept and moderately complex in execution. Elena had incorporated a small LLC in Delaware, which she had named, with a quiet sense of craft, Blue Water Holdings. Blue Water Holdings had approached Daniel's attorney 3 weeks ago with an offer to purchase the Compass Rose at assessed value, which the attorney had represented to Daniel as a legitimate marine acquisition firm. Daniel, who was currently attempting to liquidate several assets to cover a business debt that Elena knew about and that he believed no one outside his immediate circle knew about, had agreed to the sale with the speed of a man who is relieved rather than curious. Elena had then, using a series of document transfers that were entirely legal and that relied on a provision in Delaware LLC law regarding beneficial interest reassignment, redirected the ultimate ownership of Blue Water Holdings to a trust. That trust's sole beneficiary was Cassidy Vane. This was the part that Marcus knew. What Marcus did not know, because Elena had not told him, was that Elena had also, over the previous 4 months, quietly ensured that the following facts were assembled, documented, and held in a file that would be delivered to Cassidy's home address 1 week after the transfer completed. Fact 1, the Compass Rose's engine, a twin diesel configuration installed in 2008, had been running in a state of deferred maintenance since 2019. The engine mounts had corroded beyond the manufacturer's tolerance. The port engine had a crack in the heat exchanger that Daniel's captain, a man named Terry Foss, who had worked for the Marsh family for 11 years and who had been paid, Elena had confirmed to stay quiet, had identified in a written note to Daniel dated March of last year. The note was in the file. The repair estimate from the only certified mechanic in the region who worked on that engine configuration was $52,000 for parts and labor, not including the additional cost of the haul-out. Fact 2. The hull insurance on the Compass Rose had lapsed 14 months ago when Daniel had allowed the policy to cancel rather than pay the renewal premium of $18,000, a decision he had made because he was running the boat on the weekends for private charters, unlicensed, through a third-party booking platform. And the insurance company had sent a letter questioning the commercial use disclosure, and Daniel had responded to that letter by canceling the policy rather than answering the question. A boat with a lapsed hull insurance policy and a $50,000 engine problem cannot be legally chartered. It cannot be financed. It cannot be sold, except to a buyer who either does not do due diligence or who is willing to take the full remediation cost off the purchase price. The assessed value Daniel had accepted from Blue Water Holdings was $940,000, which was the number produced by an appraisal that Elena had arranged using an appraiser who had appraised the boat's market value without a marine survey, which is legal, but which produces a figure entirely disconnected from the boat's actual condition. Fact 3. The one that Elena considered the most elegant. The Compass Rose had a pending lien from the marina itself, a slip via rearage that Daniel had not paid for 7 months, and a separate lien from a marine contractor in Fort Lauderdale who had done engine work in 2021 that Daniel had paid for with a check that had subsequently been disputed through his bank. Both liens were recorded in the Florida UCC system. A competent maritime attorney could work through them. The cost of doing so, between the lien payoffs and the attorney fees, was approximately $38,000. Elena had calculated the total liability burden that now accompanied the Compass Rose: $52,000 for the engine, $38,000 for the liens, approximately $15,000 to remediate the hull blistering, $9,000 for the electrical system, and an ongoing slip fee of $4,500 per month for a boat that could not be legally operated until the engine was repaired. The boat that Cassidy Vane was about to inherit was a $940,000 asset that required roughly $114,000 of immediate capital to become functional, and that was generating $4,500 of monthly liability simply by sitting in the water. Daniel had, in his original transaction with Blue Water Holdings, received $940,000 minus his attorney's 2%. He had already transferred those funds to cover his business debt, which Elena also knew the details of, but which was not in the present moment her primary interest. Cassidy would receive the boat, the liens, the engine crack, and the insurance gap. Daniel would receive the notification. Elena picked up the gas station coffee and drank some of it. It was, as promised by every gas station coffee she had encountered in 2 lifetimes, bad. The foam cup was thin against her fingers, and the smell of the marina underneath the smell of the coffee was that same rust and salt combination, and for a moment she was aware of the full weight of the last 8 years sitting behind her like a long room she had crossed. She did not feel triumphant. Triumph was loud and required an audience. What she felt was something closer to the satisfaction of a completed calculation, the clean closure of a proof that works out. "Let's go inside," she said. The marina office had a waiting room that was not really a waiting room. A row of plastic chairs against a wall covered in notices about slip regulations and a bulletin board with faded flyers for boat shows that had happened 3 years ago. The notary was a woman named Diane, who drove out from the county seat for jobs like this, and who had done 4 other signings for Elena over the past year, and who had long since stopped asking questions because Elena always had the documents pre-prepared and always had the ID already out, and always knew exactly which page required which signature, which made Diane's life administratively frictionless. Marcus spread the documents on the folding table that passed for a conference surface. Elena sat down. She uncapped the pen she had brought, which was her own pen, a matte black medium point that wrote cleanly and that she had used for every significant document in her second life, not for superstition, but because consistency in the physical act of signing things had, she had found, a stabilizing effect on her focus. She read the transfer documents from beginning to end. Not because she had not read them already, she had read them 11 times. She drafted them herself and had outside counsel review them twice, but because reading a document before signing it is a discipline, and disciplines do not suspend themselves for convenience. Diane notarized. Marcus witnessed. Elena signed on every line that required her signature, which was 4 lines, and initialed on 8 additional pages. And when the final page was signed and the notary seal pressed into the paper with that specific mechanical thud that is one of the quieter sounds in the world, Elena set the pen down. "I'll file the UCC amendment today," Marcus said, gathering his copy. "Before noon." Before noon. Diane packed her seal away and accepted the check Elena had prepared in advance and left without conversation, which Elena appreciated. She sat alone for a moment in the marina office with the filed copies in front of her. Through the window she could see the dock, and beyond it the slip where the compass rose sat in the gray morning water, its white hull catching no particular light, its fenders slightly deflated in a way that Terry Foss, had he still been employed, would have corrected before the morning was older. Terry Foss was no longer employed. Elena had sent an anonymous tip to the State Marine Licensing Board 6 weeks ago, attaching a photograph of the Compass Rose conducting an unlicensed charter on a Saturday in November. A photograph taken from the public pier with a long lens by a photography student. Elena had paid $200 for a morning's work. Terry's license was under review. He had already found work at a boatyard in Alabama and had, as far as Elena could determine, no idea that any of what was happening was connected to anything he had done. It was not connected to anything he had done. Terry was collateral maintenance, the kind of loose thread that a careful person ties off not out of malice, but out of professionalism. She stood, took her copy of the documents, and walked out of the marina office into the morning that was now fully light, the sun having climbed above the tree line and laid a wash of flat gold across the water. A pelican sat on a dock piling nearby with the particular stillness of a creature that has found a useful vantage point and sees no reason to alter it. She understood that feeling. The drive back to the city took 40 minutes, and Elena spent it in silence, which Marcus had learned not to fill unless he had something structural to contribute. He drove well, which she had noted during their first shared work trip, and had thereafter always arranged for him to drive on the mornings when she needed to think. What she was thinking about now was Cassidy. Not with hatred. Hatred was the emotion of the first life, the raw and consuming thing that had lived in her chest for the 18 months of the divorce, and that had never quite resolved into anything useful. In the second life, she had spent considerable time understanding what Cassidy Vane was, not as a moral category, but as a behavioral profile. Cassidy was 42 now, and had been with Daniel for 3 years in the current timeline, which was slightly longer than the 2 years of the first timeline, but structurally identical. The overlap was again total, though in this life Elena had never married Daniel. She had not allowed herself to. She had, with the precision of someone who knows which parts of a story are load-bearing. He simply declined his proposal in year 2 of their relationship, citing career focus, and had watched from the adjacent distance of a city that was large enough to provide separation but small enough to provide visibility. She had watched him move toward Cassidy with the inevitability of a tide. She had watched Cassidy receive him with the specific warmth of a woman who has spent years believing that eventually the situation will formalize, and who is now watching it formalize, and who has perhaps allowed herself to believe that the quality of the love overrides the circumstances of its origin. Elena did not know whether Cassidy loved Daniel. She suspected so. She had known Cassidy for most of her adult life, had been her closest friend for 8 years of the first life, and had understood by the end of it that Cassidy was not a calculating person. She was a person who wanted things with a totality that overwhelmed her judgment, and who had wanted Daniel with that totality, and who had made, from Elena's perspective, the precise choice that Elena would have made if she were operating from Cassidy's information set. That understanding did not produce forgiveness. It produced clarity. The clarity was this. Cassidy had made a choice that she believed was costless to Elena in the long run, because she had believed, and perhaps still believed, that Daniel was not the right person for Elena. That Elena was too sharp and too self-contained for Daniel's particular kind of easy charm. That in some generous reframing the two of them had done Elena a service. Cassidy had, Elena suspected, told herself this story so many times that it had become indistinguishable from fact. The boat would interrupt that story. Not loudly, not in a way that could be traced to Elena's design, because Elena's name did not appear anywhere in the Blue Water Holdings documentation, the beneficial interest transfer documents, or the trust instrument. Those names were all clean. What Cassidy would receive, approximately 1 week from today, was a packet of documents from a title company explaining that a trust in her name had received a vessel transfer and that she was now the registered owner of the Compass Rose, slip 44 at the marina, along with a summary of the title search that the title company was obligated to provide, which would include the lien disclosures. The same week, Terry Foss's former captain's log for the Compass Rose, obtained by Elena through a Marine Records request that was entirely routine under the maritime documentation rules, would be delivered to Cassidy's address by a different service. The log contained, in Terry's own handwriting, the notation from March of last year about the port engine heat exchanger. It contained 12 other maintenance deferrals across 18 months. It contained, in the back section where Terry had kept personal notes rather than official logs, a reference to Daniel's instruction to keep the old girl looking good for now. We'll deal with the mechanicals when the Cassidy situation gets straightened out. Elena had read that notation 7 times when she first found the log. She had found it unremarkable as a strategic resource. As a personal document, it was the most efficient summary of Daniel Marsh she had ever encountered. Compressed into a single sentence by the man himself, delivered to a log that he had apparently never expected anyone to request under public maritime record law. She put the thought away. The city appeared around the highway's curve, the skyline undramatic in morning light. The buildings simply present the way buildings simply are. Marcus exited the highway at the downtown ramp and navigated the morning traffic with the particular patience of someone who has accepted that urban driving is a condition and not a problem. "Breakfast?" he asked. "No, I need to be at the office by 8:30. "The Castillo matter." "Yes." The Castillo matter was a separate case entirely, a maritime insurance dispute involving a cargo vessel that had nothing to do with Daniel or Cassidy, and that would occupy the next 4 months of Elena's professional life in a way she found genuinely interesting, because it involved a specific loophole in the cargo valuation provisions of the Carmack Amendment's maritime analog that had not been litigated in the circuit for 19 years, and that Elena believed was worth testing. She had discovered in the second life, a person who genuinely liked the law. Not the performance of it, not the adversarial theater that many litigators subsisted on, but the structure, the way that a carefully drafted document was a machine that ran whether or not anyone was watching it, the way that a provision properly understood and properly applied could produce outcomes that appeared, to the uninformed observer, to be almost magical in their precision. She had been uninformed once. She had sat in a divorce attorney's office and been told, with professional gentleness, that the asset division was unfavorable and that there was very little remedy available given the structure of their prenuptial agreement, and she had accepted this because she had not known enough to question it. She was not uninformed now. Marcus pulled up to the building, double-parked with the hazards on, the way she preferred. 8:30, she said, getting out. "So, I'll have the UCC amendment filed by 10. "By 11 is fine." She had said noon earlier, but 11 was the actual cutoff that mattered, because the county recorder's system updated its public database at noon, and she wanted the filing visible in the system before that update. 11 was sufficient. She went upstairs. Her office was on the 14th floor, which did not have a view that anyone would call dramatic, but which had a north-facing window that on clear days showed a strip of the bay, and on this morning showed that strip under the flat gold light, the water darker than the sky by exactly 1 shade. She stood at the window for a moment with her jacket still on. Her phone showed no messages from Daniel. The alert service he used did not send notifications until a filing was confirmed, which had not yet happened. She had approximately 2 hours before his world changed in a way he would not initially understand. She sat down at her desk and opened the Castillo file. The work was detailed and absorbing, and she spent the next 3 hours in it with the full engagement of someone who has completed one task and is genuinely present in the next. She had found, in the second life, that this was one of the more durable satisfactions available, the ability to be wholly in a problem and nowhere else. In the first life, she had been perpetually slightly elsewhere, always half attending to Daniel's schedule and Daniel's preferences, and the ongoing project of being the kind of partner Daniel had seemed to require, which had turned out to be the kind of partner who did not notice things. She had been very good at not noticing things. It was, she had eventually understood, the primary skill the first life had asked of her. At 11:14, her phone rang with a number she recognized as the filing service that handled her UCC work. "Filed and confirmed. the assistant said. Timestamp 10:57. Thank you. She set the phone down and returned to the Castillo file. At 12:08, her phone produced the single vibration that indicated a calendar notification, which she had set as a quiet reminder. She did not look at it. She knew what it meant. The public database had updated. Somewhere in the marina, Slip 44 now showed a new registered owner in the county vessel registry. At 12:31, she received a text from a number she had never saved, but that she recognized from the pattern. It was Daniel's secondary phone, the one he used for personal messages to people who were not Cassidy, a phone whose number she had obtained in her second life through methods that she preferred not to categorize explicitly, but that had been entirely oriented toward documentation rather than any form of contact. The text said, "What is Blue Water Holdings?" She did not answer. She was not expected to. The message had not been sent to her, obviously. She had merely, through a technical arrangement she had made with a service that monitored specific phone numbers for a monthly fee. I received a forwarded copy. The service was legal in the state where she had incorporated it. She would stop the forwarding today. She had needed only the confirmation that Daniel had received the property alert. He had received it. She put the phone face down and worked through lunch. The rest of the day passed with the ordinary rhythm of a law office on a Wednesday, the calls and drafting and 2 brief meetings with colleagues and the kind of low-grade problem-solving that constituted most of professional life and that Elena had come to find stabilizing. She left at 6:15 and drove herself home, which she preferred when she did not have early morning logistics to manage. Her apartment was on the 9th floor of a building that had been built in the early 90s and showed its age in the way those buildings did. In the quality of the light fixtures and the specific sound the elevator made on the way up, a minor mechanical complaint that the building management addressed every 2 years with the same lubricant, and that always returned by month 14. She had learned to find it companionable. She made dinner, which was pasta with a sauce from a jar that she did not pretend was adequate, but that she chose for speed. And ate it at the kitchen counter while reading a brief that she had printed because she read legal documents better on paper than on screen, a quirk she had given up apologizing for after the first year of practice. At 8:47, her phone showed a call from a number she also recognized, this one belonging to a mutual acquaintance of hers and Cassidy's named Georgia, who periodically served as the information conduit between social circles that had officially separated but that still leaked. She let it ring. Georgia left a voicemail, which Elena did not listen to. She understood the content without needing the specifics. Daniel would have called Cassidy by now. The call would have been chaotic. Cassidy would have called Georgia, who was the person both of them called when something chaotic happened, because Georgia was reliably available and reliably transmitted. Elena finished the brief, washed her single dish, and went to bed at 10:30. She slept well. She had slept well consistently in the second life, which had surprised her initially, given what she was doing and why. She had expected the project to generate a kind of ambient disturbance, the moral friction of sustained and calculated action against people who had, at least in the current timeline, not yet done anything directly to her, but the friction had not materialized. She had examined this carefully, had spent several quiet evenings in the first years of the second life trying to determine whether the absence of friction indicated something troubling about her character. She had concluded that it did not. What it indicated was the specific quality of second life clarity, the understanding that the first life was not a separate event, but the same life continued, that the betrayal she was responding to was real, that the loss of the first life was real, and that the machinery she was building was not revenge in the operatic sense, but something more like restitution, the careful recalibration of a situation that had been allowed to run in one direction for too long. She woke at 5:45, made coffee properly this time, and sat at the kitchen table with the cup and the morning quiet, and the sense that today was a different kind of day from yesterday. Not a strategic day, but an ordinary one, and that ordinary days were in their way a form of luxury that she had not properly valued in the first life. 3 days later, on a Saturday morning, she received a forwarded message through the monitoring service. The service was still running. She had decided to extend it an additional week. And the message was from Cassidy's number to Daniel's secondary phone. It said, "I'm looking at something called a UCC lien. What does that mean?" Then, 4 minutes later, "Daniel, please call me." Then 20 minutes after that, "The engine repair is $50,000. Daniel, I need you to call me now. Elena read the messages once, forwarded them to a secure folder, and disabled the monitoring service. She sat at the kitchen table with the coffee going cold and felt the specific texture of a completed calculation, which is not warmth but is not cold either, is closer to the quiet that comes after a long piece of music ends and before the room adjusts to its absence. She thought about the first time she had stood on the deck of the Compass Rose, which had been 2 weeks after she and Daniel became official. Which had been a Sunday in June, with the water the color of a bruise and the wind coming from the south, and Daniel standing at the wheel with the particular pride of a man who has inherited something beautiful and knows it and wants someone else to know it too. She had stood on the deck and felt the engine's vibration through her feet and believed that she was being welcomed into something permanent. She had been, in the most technical sense, correct. The boat was permanent. Permanence, say she had learned, was not the same as benevolence. Things could be permanent in their structure and disastrous in their content, and the permanence was simply the duration across which the disaster compounded. The coffee was cold. She took it to the sink and poured it out. She was 48 hours from the delivery of the documentation packet to Cassidy's address. She had arranged it through a document delivery service that operated out of a city 300 miles away, and that had no reason to know what it was delivering or to whom. The packet contained the marine survey from the insurance renewal, the captain's log with Terry's notations, the lien documentation, the insurance lapse confirmation, and a single-page summary that Elena had drafted herself without letterhead or signature. A plain recitation of the facts in the order of their financial severity, the kind of document that a person reads once and does not forget. She had not written it with malice. She had written it the way she wrote briefs, with the specific economy of someone who respects the reader's intelligence and wants to waste none of their time. Daniel's name appeared in the packet 0 times. The documents were primary sources, official records, the log. There was no editorial commentary. There was no accusation. There was only the factual architecture of the situation that Cassidy now owned. Whatever Cassidy chose to do with that information was not Elena's calculation. What Elena knew was that the information was accurate, complete, and inescapable. A person of ordinary intelligence, presented with a marine survey, an insurance lapse notice, 2 UCC lien filings, and a captain's log with a handwritten notation about deferred mechanicals, so you would understand their situation without editorial assistance. Cassidy was not a person of ordinary intelligence. She was sharp in the particular way of people who have spent their lives navigating social dynamics rather than technical ones, which was a different intelligence and one that Elena had always respected, had found genuinely useful and enjoyable during the years of their friendship. So before she had understood that it was the same intelligence that had allowed Cassidy to manage a 2-year concurrent relationship without producing a single observable inconsistency in the friendship. That intelligence would serve her now, in the reading of the packet, in the particular speed with which she would understand the geometry of her situation. Elena went to the office on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday with the ordinary discipline of someone who has work to do and finds value in doing it. On Thursday afternoon, while she was reviewing a deposition transcript in the Castillo matter, her office phone rang with the direct line, the number she gave to people she knew personally. She looked at the display for 2 full seconds before answering. It was Cassidy. "I need to talk to you," Cassidy said. Her voice was the voice Elena remembered from the first life, from 100 conversations over 100 occasions, from the phone call at 2 in the morning when Cassidy's father had died. From the lunch where they had laughed for 20 minutes about nothing important, from the voice message Elena had received in the divorce, 5 seconds of silence followed by a disconnection that she had played back twice, and that had meant something she had never quite resolved. "Okay," Elena said. There was a pause. Cassidy had clearly expected something other than one word. "Can we meet?" Elena looked at the deposition transcript on her desk. She looked at the north-facing window with its strip of bay. She looked at her hands, which were steady. "Where are you?" "I'm at the harbor. I'm at the marina, actually." A breath. "I've been here for an hour." "Slip 44?" Another pause, longer this time, with a quality that Elena recognized as recalibration. The understanding, arriving in real time, that Elena knew the slip number. "Yes," Cassidy said. "I can be there in 40 minutes. She drove herself. The road to the marina was familiar in both directions now, having made it twice in the past week in one direction and innumerable times across both lifetimes in the other. The marina itself was unchanged from the morning of the signing, except that it was midday and the sun was direct, and the water was that greenish blue that it became when the light was overhead. The color of something that has been described as beautiful so often that the description has become a reflex rather than an observation. Cassidy was standing at the end of the dock near slip 44. She was wearing a gray jacket over dark jeans, and her hair was shorter than Elena remembered from the last time she had seen her, which had been across the room at a gallery event 14 months ago, where they had acknowledged each other with the nod of people who have too much history to pretend and too much structure to engage. She turned when she heard Elena's footsteps on the dock boards. The first second was the kind of silence that two people who know each other very well use to read each other very quickly. Elena took in the fatigue around Cassidy's eyes, the tension in her shoulders, the document envelope under her arm that was thick enough to be the packet. Cassidy took in whatever she took in. "You knew," Cassidy said. Not an accusation, a statement of architecture. Elena did not answer immediately. She looked past Cassidy at the compass rose, which sat in its slip in the midday light, with the fenders still slightly deflated. The white hull reflected the water in rippling lines. "The engine needs $50,000, Elena said. Cassidy's jaw tightened. "I know. I've had 2 marine mechanics out here this week. They both said the same thing." She shifted the envelope under her arm. "The liens total $36,000. One of the mechanics told me I'm looking at maybe $15,000 for the hull. There's no insurance." "No. The slip fee is $4,500 a month." "Yes." Cassidy looked at her for a long time. The water made its small sounds against the hull, against the pilings. A boat moved somewhere in the middle distance. Its engine a low, sustained note? "The trust," Cassidy said. "Blue Water Holdings. The trust that held the interest before it transferred to me." She held up the envelope. "I had an attorney look at the documents. He said the beneficial interest structure was straightforward, but he'd never seen it set up exactly that way. He said whoever designed it knew maritime and commercial law very well." "That's a common structure," Elena said. "Elena." "It is." Cassidy looked at the boat. The boat was not looking back. The boat was simply present. $52,000 of deferred engine repair and $36,000 of recorded liens, and a hull that was slowly osmosing water through its gel coat, all of it contained in a white fiberglass shell that had never stopped being beautiful. "Did Daniel know?" Cassidy asked. "About the liens? The engine?" "You could ask him." "I did." A pause. "He says the appraisal was legitimate, that the value was accurate at the time of the assessment. The appraisal was done without a marine survey. That's legal. Is it usual? For private sales, it happens." Cassidy turned back to Elena with an expression that Elena had not seen on her face before, which was the expression of someone assembling a structure and finding that all the pieces fit and not liking the shape of the structure that results. "You were in love with him," Cassidy said. "In the beginning." "Before you ended it." "Yes. And then you ended it. And you watched." She said this without inflection, which was its own inflection. "You've been watching for 3 years." Elena looked at the water. "I need to understand something," Cassidy said. "Not about the boat, about what you want from this." "I don't want anything from it." "That's not an answer." "It's the only accurate one I have." Cassidy was quiet for a moment. The fatigue around her eyes was the particular fatigue of someone who has been awake for several nights running the same calculation and not liking the result. Elena recognized it because she had worn it herself. In the first life, during the 18 months of the divorce, looking at documents in a way she had not known how to read. "He's saying I should disclaim the inheritance," Cassidy said. "Just that a trust transfer to a named beneficiary can be disclaimed within 9 months under the IRS rules. He says I should disclaim it, and that the boat would revert to Blue Water Holdings." "Yes." "Blue Water Holdings is dissolved," Elena said. "I filed the dissolution with Delaware last week." The silence this time was different. It had the texture of a door that has been shut very gently. "If I disclaim and there's no valid recipient, the transfer becomes contested. Yes." The vessel would likely be placed in a receivership pending resolution of the liens. The lien holder would apply for a forced sale at maritime auction. At auction, a vessel with unrepaired mechanicals and 2 UCC liens and no insurance typically goes for significantly below assessed value, sometimes as little as 20%. Cassidy looked at the envelope again. 20% of $940 is $188,000, she said. The math was instant. Well, Cassidy had always been fast with numbers. Approximately, Daniel would owe the difference between the sale price and the outstanding liens. If the liens were not satisfied by the auction proceeds, yes, the marine contractor lien would likely follow him personally, given the circumstances of the original dispute. Another silence. You're saying he'd be liable for a deficit in the range of... I'm not saying anything about his liability. I'm describing how maritime auction mechanics work generally. Cassidy looked at her for a long time. The kind of looking that has nothing to do with visual processing and everything to do with adjustment. The recalibration of a map that has just revealed terrain it did not previously show. You let me inherit it because keeping it costs more than it's worth, Cassidy said. And disclaiming it is worse. Elena did not answer. How long did this take you? Well, the structure. It's a common structure, Elena said again. Cassidy made a small sound that was not a laugh but contained some of the same material, compressed by exhaustion and something else. You never liked boats, she said. I remember you telling me that years ago, that you didn't understand why anyone would want something that cost that much to maintain and just sat in the water. I was wrong about that, Elena said. They're very useful things. Cassidy looked at the compass rose one more time. The midday light was full on the hull now, and the water was moving in small patterns around the waterline, where the blistering had begun. Invisible from this angle, documented in the survey that was in the packet under Cassidy's arm. What would you do? Cassidy asked, not rhetorically, with the genuine quality of a question being asked to a person who is believed to know the answer. Elena considered. She looked at the boat with the same attention she had given it on the morning of the signing, the same calm assessment. I'd hire a maritime attorney, she said. Not Daniel's attorney, someone who specializes in vessel liens and distressed asset negotiation. I'd approach the lien holder directly, offer a structured settlement, and then negotiate the slip fee with the marina. There are federal programs for engine replacement on documented vessels of a certain age that can cover a portion of the cost. It takes about 18 months, but it's survivable. Cassidy looked at her. You're telling me how to fix it. I'm telling you how it can be fixed. Why? The question was direct and had no deflection available. Elena looked at the water. She thought about the answer for a moment. Not for calculation's sake, but because the answer was real and she wanted to give it accurately. Because the boat was always going to be this, she said. It was always going to be something that looked like one thing and was another thing underneath. What changes now is that you know what you're holding. Cassidy absorbed this with the stillness of someone who has been a very good listener for a long time and is using that skill in a new direction. The attorney you'd recommend, she said. Who is it? Elena took a card from her jacket pocket. She had put it there this morning, not from anticipation but from habit. She always had several cards and often left the office with them still in her pocket. She held it out. Cassidy took it. She looked at the name on it, which was not Elena's name, but the name of a colleague at another firm who did maritime work, and whose practice was exactly suited to what Cassidy was now facing. He's good, Elena said. He did a similar lien negotiation for a client of mine last year. Came out with about 60 cents on the dollar on the settlement. Cassidy turned the card over. The back was blank. She looked at the front again. Will you tell him I'm calling? I'll let him know to expect your call. The midday sounds of the marina continued. A dock cart rolled somewhere nearby. The water maintained its business against the hull. The Pelican that had been on the piling a week ago was not there now, having presumably found a different vantage or a different marina, and the piling was just a piling. Cassidy put the card in her pocket. She held the document envelope at her side and looked once more at the compass rose with an expression that had shifted, not to resolution, nothing so clean, but to something adjacent to acceptance, the recognition of a set of facts that requires response rather than continued assessment. He told me you were cold, she said. Daniel. He used to say it like it was a flaw. Elena said nothing. I told him it wasn't, Cassidy said. I said that what he was reading as cold was just precision, that you were precise. He disagreed. He said precision without warmth was the same as cold. He was wrong. Cassidy looked at her. The fatigue was still there. Underneath it, something that had the shape of understanding. Not reconciliation, not forgiveness in either direction. Something more functional and perhaps more durable. You two people who know something true about each other and have lost the useful fiction that they didn't. Precision without warmth, Cassidy said, and then you refer me to a maritime attorney and tell me the engine program. The Federal Boating Infrastructure Grant covers some engine costs for eligible vessels, Elena said. The boat qualifies. It's documented in the U.S. Coast Guard Registry. The application window opens in March. Cassidy looked at her for a long moment. Then she turned and walked back down the dock toward the parking lot. The document envelope under her arm, the card in her pocket, her footsteps even on the teak composite boards in the places where they gave. And even in the places where they didn't. Elena stayed at the slip for a few minutes. She looked at the compass rose, the white hull, the slightly deflated fenders, the waterline where the blistering was beginning its slow work under the surface, the cockpit where Daniel had stood with a sunset behind him, and a glass of something in his hand, and the particular expression of a man who believes he knows the value of everything he owns. She thought about the engine, which was running hot somewhere in the bilge, or not running since the boat had not been taken out since the insurance lapsed, the engine sitting in the dark below the deck, holding its crack in the heat exchanger with the patience of damaged things, waiting for someone to either repair it or decide not to. She thought about March, about the grant application window, about Cassidy's attorney making calls to lienholder offices, negotiating with the patience and specific knowledge of someone who does this for a living. She thought about Daniel at 30,000 feet. Descending toward an airport where his phone would show a message that he did not understand yet, and that he was going to spend considerable time and money attempting to understand and undo. She took one long look at the boat. Then she walked back down the dock, past the plastic chairs in the marina office window, past the bulletin board with the faded boat show flyers, past the piling where the Pelican had been, to the parking lot where her car sat in the midday sun with the particular heat of a vehicle that has been waiting and is prepared to be useful again. She got in, started the engine, and drove back toward the city. She had a deposition to prepare for Thursday, and a brief due on Friday, and a client call at 4 that she had been looking forward to, which was a small claims maritime dispute involving a dockmaster and a charter company, and a specific clause in a dock usage agreement that everyone had signed and no one had read, the kind of quiet legal puzzle that rewarded attention. She drove without music, which was how she drove when she was thinking, and what she was thinking was not about Daniel or Cassidy or the compass rose or any of the machinery she had assembled over the past 8 years. Then she was thinking about the Carmack Amendment maritime analog, about the specific gap in the cargo valuation provision that had not been tested in 19 years, and about the deposition witness she needed to prepare, and about whether the gap was genuinely unexplored or whether there was a district court ruling she had missed that would make the argument more complicated. She thought it was genuinely unexplored. There was only one way to find out, The city opened ahead of her as the highway straightened and the skyline settled into its midday version. No drama, just the ordinary presence of buildings that have been built and have continued to stand. She took the downtown exit and rejoined the ordinary traffic, and made the 2 lights she usually missed, and found a parking space 1 block closer to the office than usual, which she noted with the mild satisfaction of the genuinely ordinary. In the elevator, she checked her phone. Nothing from Daniel, nothing from Cassidy, a message from Marcus about the Castillo deposition prep that she would respond to when she was at her desk, a notification from the Bar Association about a continuing education credit due in 90 days that she had already completed and just needed to log. The elevator made its familiar mechanical complaint on the way up and resolved it on the way out, and she walked to her office and sat down and put her jacket over the chair and opened her laptop and found the Castillo file and the deposition prep and the question about the Carmack Amendment and all the unremarkable forward motion of a working day that had somewhere in its middle contained a marina and a woman and a document envelope and a card that had already, she was fairly certain, been looked at more than once. She began to work. On her window, the strip of bay was doing what it always did in the afternoon, shifting from greenish blue to a darker blue as the angle of the light changed. Not dramatically, just the daily adjustment that water makes as time moves through it, the surface always slightly different and always recognizably itself. She did not look at it. There was a deposition to prepare. She prepared it. 16 days later, Marcus appeared in her doorway at 11 in the morning with the expression of someone who has received information that he does not know how to categorize and who has decided that the only available move is direct delivery. "There's a Coast Guard documentation filing," he said. Elena looked up from the brief. "For the Compass Rose," he said. "The registered owner filed for a name change. It came through this morning." Elena waited. "It's been renamed," Marcus said. "The new name is on the filing." He held out a printout, the kind from the USCG documentation website, the standard form with the vessel ID number and the registered owner and the new hailing port and the new name. She took it. She read the new name. She read it twice. The vessel formerly known as the Compass Rose, documented vessel number 1187463. Registered owner Cassidy Vane, home port changed from the marina to a different marina 30 miles up the coast, was now named Preliminary Findings. Elena looked at the printout for a long moment. Then she set it face down on her desk and returned to the brief. "Anything else?" she said. "No," Marcus said. He lingered for half a second in the way of someone who wants to ask a follow-up and has decided against it. "I'll let you know when the grant window opens." "March," Elena said. "I'll handle the application." Marcus left. Elena worked. The brief was a good one. The gap in the amendment was real. She had confirmed it. And the argument was solid, the kind of argument that wins a case and then lives in case law as a footnote that students eventually stop reading because it has become so foundational that it no longer requires explanation. She liked that kind of argument best. She worked until 5. She took the stairs down, which she did when she needed the movement and which she never counted as exercise, just as motion, just as the ordinary physical business of a body that is occupied and in use. She walked to her car in the parking structure and drove home through traffic that was heavier than usual because of a lane closure on the bridge, which added 12 minutes. She listened to 12 minutes of news radio, which reported on things she found intellectually interesting and emotionally distant. A bill in the state legislature about maritime environmental regulations that had a provision she thought was poorly drafted. A feature about a local restaurant opening that she did not intend to visit, but that sounded competently described. At home, she cooked an actual dinner, chicken with vegetables, the kind of dinner that takes 40 minutes and produces something that tastes like effort. She ate at the kitchen table and did not look at her phone. Through the apartment window, the city made its evening sounds, traffic and distance, and the particular low-frequency hum of a place that does not stop, the kind of sound that becomes so familiar that you hear it only when it briefly pauses and then resumes. She washed her single dish. She made tea. She sat down with a library book about the economic history of shipbuilding in the Gulf Coast in the early 20th century that she had requested 3 weeks ago and that had arrived that morning and that she was genuinely looking forward to. Not for any professional reason, but because the subject interested her in the uncomplicated way that things interest a person who has more space inside them for interest than for rancor. She read until 10. She slept well. In the morning, there was coffee and a brief and a client call and the ordinary professional architecture of a day. Marcus had put the preliminary Carmack research in her inbox. It was good work. She made 3 notes in the margins and sent it back. At noon, she ate at her desk. At 2, she had the client call about the dockmaster dispute, which was going exactly where she had expected it to go, toward a settlement that nobody would love but that everybody could live with, which was the genuine outcome of most legal disputes, and which she had stopped finding anticlimactic. At 4:15, she called the maritime attorney whose card she had given to Cassidy. "She called me," he said. "Good. It's a manageable situation. I've already spoken to the marine contractor's legal counsel. They're willing to do a 65-cent settlement. The Marina Lien is straightforward. The engine program. I found a grant she qualifies for. Application window is March. We'll have the liens cleared before then." "Good," Elena said. "She's a quick study," he said. Understood the mechanics of the lien negotiation faster than most clients. I had to explain the priority ranking once, and she had it. "She's sharp," Elena said. How do you know her?" "Old friends," Elena said. She ended the call and returned to the Carmack brief. She worked until 6:30. She took the stairs. She drove home in ordinary traffic. She cooked, ate, read. The economic history of Gulf Coast shipbuilding moved through the 1920s and into the Depression and the particular way that an industry contracts and what survives the contraction and what does not, which is always, in the end, a question of what is genuinely necessary and what has been mistaken for necessary by people who could not yet see the difference. It was a good book. Outside the window, the city held its frequency. Somewhere in the marina, 30 miles up the coast, a vessel formerly known as the Compass Rose and now named Preliminary Findings sat in a slip and held its engine damage in the bilge with the patience of damaged things, waiting. The application window opened in March. Elena finished her tea, closed the book on a page she would remember, and went to sleep.